A sitting Nigerian government minister, a trained lawyer, a member of the body of benchers, was served with court papers warning him he could be sent to prison. And he allegedly looked at those papers and bulldozed the property anyway. The court notice is very specific. It reads, "Take notice that unless you obey the order of the Honorable Justice Muazu, you will be guilty of contempt of court and will be liable to be committed to a correction center." That is a Nigerian court, not a critic, not an opposition politician, telling Nyesom Wike, the FCT minister, that prison is on the table. So here is the question nobody is asking. If the man in charge of enforcing Abuja's laws cannot obey a court order himself, what does that say about every other person whose property he has demolished? Stay with me, because this story has layers that the headlines are missing. Before we go deeper, if you're just finding Nigerian Feed, welcome. This channel exists to break down what's really happening in Nigerian politics without the noise, without the spin. Subscribing to this channel is the single most powerful thing you can do to support this work. It costs you nothing, but it means everything to me. It's the only way I know you are watching, the only way the algorithm shows this to more Nigerians who need to hear it, and honestly, it's the only way I can keep doing this at the level you deserve. Hit that subscribe button right now. Let's go. Here's what happened in plain English. An Aliji businessman named Alhaji Abubakar Ibrahim, chairman of a company called Mykas Grid Ventures, owned a plot of land in Maitama, Abuja since 2006. The property measures approximately 8,572 square meters. It was originally 1.5 hectares but was later reduced after a redesign to accommodate a parking space for the As-Salam Mosque. The man has held that allocation for nearly 2 decades. Then, in November 2024, according to Ibrahim, the land was reallocated to an Italian company, Italia Company Limited, without his consent. He went to court, filed a suit in December 2025. On February 10, 2026, Justice Hamza Muazu of the FCT High Court granted an interim order directing all parties to maintain the status quo pending the determination of the motion. That order was served. Wike knew about it. Then, on February 24, 2026, 2 weeks after that court order, officials from the FCT Development Control Department, reportedly acting under Wike's directive, arrived at the site and demolished the fence and security house at plot number A06-4583 Maitama District. This is not an allegation of bad governance. This is not a policy disagreement. This is an allegation that a minister willfully disobeyed a court order while that order was still active. That is contempt of court, and in Nigeria, contempt of court can mean prison. Here's the twist. Wike is not just a minister. He is a lawyer, a senior advocate of Nigeria, a member of the body of benchers, the very institution that governs legal ethics in this country. Let that sit with you. Let me show you the legal structure behind what's happening here. When a Nigerian court issues an order to maintain the status quo, that is not a suggestion. It is legally binding on every party named in the suit, regardless of position, power, or office. That is black-letter law. When that order is allegedly violated, the aggrieved party can apply for what are called contempt proceedings. Specifically, they serve Forms 48 and 49. Forms 48 and 49 are preliminary steps in contempt proceedings under Nigerian law. They notify a party of alleged disobedience to a court order and outline potential penalties, including imprisonment. Justice Hamza Muazu granted permission for the claimant to serve those forms on Wike, not through a bailiff at his office, but through newspaper publication. That's substituted service. It means the court wasn't able to reach him through normal channels and had to go public. Think about what that implies. The matter has been adjourned to March 9th and April 23rd, 2026 for further hearing. So right now, Nyesom Wike is sitting with a formal contempt notice published in national newspapers, warning him that if he doesn't comply, he faces imprisonment. The FCT minister, a member of President Tinubu's cabinet. This is not a small matter.
Now, we get to the real story. Why is this happening? Let's start with the land itself. The plot in question was allocated in 2006 when Malam Nasir El-Rufai was FCT Minister. It sat undisturbed through multiple administrations. Then Wike comes in and suddenly the land gets reallocated to an Italian company. No notice, no consultation, just a phone call allegedly telling the owner to vacate. Ask yourself, who benefits from this? An Italian company, Italia Company Limited, now has rights to a prime Maitama plot. Who connected them to the FCT administration? What's the consideration? These are the questions that need to be asked. I'll come back to the bigger pattern here because this Maitama case is not an isolated incident. This is one story in a much larger picture that I'll connect for you before this video ends. Now, let's talk about Wike's political position. Wike backed Tinubu during the 2023 elections when many in his own party did not. His reward was the FCT ministerial seat, arguably one of the most powerful non-elected positions in Nigeria. In Abuja, allocations of pristine green belts continue, often to politically wired developers, even as court orders shielding lawful properties are treated as mere suggestions. The FCT is not just a ministry, it is a land bank. Whoever controls Abuja's land allocation controls enormous wealth and enormous political patronage. The ability to give a man a prime Maitama plot is the ability to make him loyal to you. The ability to take it away is the ability to punish an enemy. Here is the contradiction at the heart of this story. Wike has publicly championed rule of law. He has ordered arrests of developers who flouted building approvals. Just this week, he ordered the arrest of a developer responsible for a building collapse in Jikoyi, Abuja, saying the law must take its course. He is literally telling other people to obey the law while allegedly disobeying a court order himself. That is not an oversight. That is a pattern. Who are the silent players? Watch the Tinubu presidency here. The president has not publicly commented on this case. That silence is strategic. Wike needs Tinubu. Wike controls significant Rivers State political machinery. But Tinubu also cannot openly endorse a minister defying court orders. So the strategy is to let this play out quietly and hope it dies in court proceedings before it becomes a political crisis. If what I just laid out surprises you, drop a comment right now. Tell me, do you think Wike will actually face consequences or will this case quietly disappear? But before you comment, if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. I mean it. Subscribing is literally the only way you can help this channel grow. Not likes or shares alone, subscriptions. That's what tells YouTube this content matters. That's what keeps Niger Newsfeed independent. Hit subscribe, then drop your comment. Let's zoom out. What does this mean for Nigeria as a country? First, federalism. The FCT is unique in Nigeria's constitutional structure. It is not a state. The FCT minister effectively functions as a governor with enormous discretionary power over land, development, and administration. When that minister allegedly defies court orders, there is no governor, no state legislature, no local counterbalance. The only check is the judiciary, and this case tests whether that check actually works. Second, property rights. A 2025 Business Day probe revealed over 200 green conversions since 2023, many in flood-prone valleys. If you are a legitimate property owner in Abuja, with papers, with allocations going back decades, and you can still be displaced by a minister reallocating your land to a foreign company, what does that mean for investment confidence in Nigeria's capital? Third, the economic signal. FDI inflows dipped 12% in 2025 per CBN data, as tales of revoked titles and erratic enforcement spooked capital. Foreign investors watch how Nigeria treats property rights. This case, playing out in newspapers across the country, sends a message about whether legal protection of assets in Nigeria is real. Remember I mentioned this is part of a bigger pattern? Here it is. This is not the first time Wike's FCT demolitions have led to legal confrontations. A group called Sodic Parks and Gardens Ltd., a life camp operation running since 2010 with full FCDA permits, secured a High Court injunction in September 2025 barring interference, yet bulldozers allegedly circled anyway. The Maitama case is just the one where the contempt proceedings became public. There is an international dimension here, and it's not the one you'd expect. The company allegedly given Alhaji Ibrahim's reallocated Maitama plot is called Italia Company Limited. That's an Italian-linked entity. The plot was said to have been allocated to Italia Company Limited, and when the original owner went to court, it was Italia Company Limited named as the second defendant alongside Wike. Who is this company? Who are the principals? How did a foreign-linked firm end up at the center of a disputed FCT land reallocation? These questions have not been publicly answered, but they matter because if there is any foreign business interest being facilitated through irregular land allocation in Nigeria's capital, that goes beyond domestic politics into the territory of investment ethics and regulatory governance. Nigeria's relationships with European partners, including Italy, are built on frameworks of transparency and rule of law. A case where a foreign-linked company allegedly benefits from a disputed reallocation that defied a court order is exactly the kind of story that ends up in foreign media and complicates those relationships.
Let me be fair here. What's the other side of this story? Wike's supporters would argue that the FCT minister has a mandate to reclaim illegally or improperly held land in Abuja. They would say decades of corruption under previous administrations left Abuja riddled with questionable allocations, and that bold action is necessary to fix the city. They are not entirely wrong on that point. Abuja's land administration has been a cesspool of double allocations, forged documents, and politically connected squatters for years. A minister who does nothing is also failing. But here's where that argument falls apart. The existence of a court order changes everything. Even if Wike believed the original allocation to Ibrahim was improper, the correct legal response was to challenge it in court, not to demolish while a case was actively before a judge. As the lawyer put it, once a court issues an order to maintain status quo, that order is binding on all parties regardless of position, power, or office. The other misconception floating around is that this is a political hit job, that enemies of Wike are weaponizing the judiciary against him. That argument doesn't hold because Wike is not the complainant in this case. A private citizen is, and the court order existed before the demolition happened. You cannot manufacture a contempt case unless someone actually defies a court order. The most dangerous misconception is that this case will simply go away. In Nigerian politics, big cases against powerful men often do disappear, but this one is different. It is not a criminal charge brought by the government, it is a civil contempt case brought by a private company. The government cannot drop it, only the plaintiff can, and Mykas Grid has shown no signs of backing down. So what happens next? Here's my read. Most likely scenario. Wike's legal team moves quickly to file a response before the April 23rd court date. They will likely argue that the demolition was either not carried out on his directive or that the property in question falls under legitimate FCT Development Control authority, trying to create enough legal ambiguity to slow the process down. Cases like this in Nigeria can run for years. What to watch? If Wike files a counter-affidavit before April 23rd, that tells you he's taking this seriously and engaging legally. If he stays silent and no representation appears, that is a red flag. It could mean he's betting on political pressure making the case disappear. Watch the April 23rd date closely. Best case scenario. The court proceedings force a negotiated settlement. Ibrahim gets compensation or his land back, the contempt case is withdrawn, and both sides quietly move on. This is how most FCT land disputes end. Worst case scenario. Wike continues to ignore proceedings. The court escalates. Committal proceedings go further. We enter unprecedented territory. A sitting federal minister facing active imprisonment proceedings.
That would trigger a constitutional crisis around whether a minister can be imprisoned while in office and would land squarely on President Tinubu's desk. Long term, the deeper question is whether Abuja's land administration will ever be reformed. Without a transparent, digitized, publicly accessible land registry, one that is insulated from ministerial interference, every FCT minister, regardless of party, will face exactly these kinds of allegations. The system itself is broken. Wike is both a product of that system and, in this case, allegedly its most visible abuser. I opened this video with one question. If the man in charge of enforcing Abuja's laws cannot obey a court order himself, what does that say about every other demolition he has ordered? Here's my measured answer. It says that power in Nigeria, at this level, still operates on the assumption of impunity. The assumption that titles, connections, and political cover make you untouchable. Wike has operated under that assumption, and for a long time it has worked. But a court order is a court order, and a contempt notice in a national newspaper is not something you can quietly make disappear. The April 23rd hearing will be a test, not just of this case, but of whether Nigeria's judiciary still has teeth when the person in the dock is a powerful federal minister. My take: watch this case carefully. It matters more than most people realize. Now, I want to hear yours. Do you think Wike faces real consequences here, or does this end quietly? Drop it in the comments. If this breakdown gave you clarity on what's really happening in Abuja, do me one favor. Share this video with one person who needs to understand it. And if you haven't subscribed to Niger News Feed yet, this is the moment. Subscribing is the only way to tell YouTube that this type of independent, fact-based Nigerian political analysis deserves to exist. It's free, it takes 2 seconds, and it is genuinely the most direct way you can help me keep doing this work at the highest level possible. Subscribe, share, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp.